Thank you, Harry. Okay. For some reason, we continue to have some inconsistency with our microphones, but I think we've resolved it once and for all. Thank you. Welcome to the national headquarters of the Theosophical Society in America. My name is John Chianchosi. I'm Director of Public Programs. And at this time, I ask that you silence your cell phones and other noise-making electronic devices. This evening's presentation is being streamed live, and so I also welcome our friends watching through the internet. The Theosophical Society promotes study, meditation, and service. We encourage open-minded inquiry into the world religions, philosophy, science, and the arts. And we have a deep respect for the unity of all life. Our goal is to help people explore the spiritual path so as to arrive at a deeper understanding regarding the wisdom of the ages. Furthermore, we feel that this wisdom is not limited to any one tradition, and thus we offer programs from all the traditions. If you have not already done so, I'd like to invite you to take one of our program catalogs in which you will find all the programs being offered during the remainder of this year. These programs can also be found on our website, and there you can register those that are of special interest to you. The Theosophical Society is a membership organization, and there are many benefits to being a member. One of the new ones is that you get to attend all these Thursday evening lectures free of charge. And so if you are a member, you can just come every Thursday. So that'll become your regular activity on Thursday evenings to attend all these interesting lectures. You also get a discount for many of the other programs, as well as borrowing rights from our library. However, what we offer here, including programs and all the resources, are open to the public at large and always welcome. Whether you are a member or not a member, please come and come often. Now, this evening, I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Rosemary Hurwitz, who will be giving this talk tonight. She received her Enneagram certification in a Pastoral Studies program at Loyola University in 2001. An accredited professional member of the International Enneagram Association, she is on the faculty at Common Ground in Chicago and has been published in 5 inspirational compilation books, including No Mistakes: How Can You Change Adversity into Abundance? Rosemary has certifications in intuitive counseling and angel card reading. She coaches with and teaches the Enneagram internationally. And tonight, most appropriately, she will speak on the Enneagram, Discover Your Personality Type for Spiritual Growth. Please join me in welcoming Rosemary Hurwitz.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. I was here many years ago. Ron Miller, the late Ron Miller, who was a very dear friend of mine, was a very dear friend of yours. And he brought me here, and everywhere he sent me, I got work, so it was great to have him as a mentor. And my husband and I used to love to go over to Common Ground and listen to their talks, and they had a similar situation, a setup. Sadly, because they're not for profit, they're no longer, but I have been facilitating a group for emotional wellness and self-awareness with the Enneagram for 10 years, and it was wonderful when we had our farewell time at Common Ground last month, and Reverend Norval of the Methodist Church of Christ said, "Come on over here and use one of our rooms to continue your group." So I do that, and I have monthly workshops. And I'll share about all that at the end, where you can find me if you'd like to either have a personal session or you'd like to have more diving deeper. We hope to do that here after Saturday's program. But let me start by telling you the reason that I became passionate about this subject was because primarily, there's all sorts of reasons that converge, right, that come together. As John Lennon says, you know, life is what happens when we're making other plans, busy making other plans. And why things converge the way they do is probably deeper than one thing. But the big thing for me was that when I was 18, I was in a nursing program at a college that I didn't really want to be at, but my father was a professor at the university that I wanted to be at, and I was afraid that he'd follow me all around, and like he was doing with my sisters, and I wanted to exercise a snippet of independence, and I was working at a clinic, so I thought, I'm a nurturing type, I'm going to be a nurse. Well, I got into the program, and I didn't do well. I'm a much more communicative and creative type than I am a science type. And it was difficult for me. All my friends had scattered off to, you know, different places as they do as college freshmen. And I was very depressed. I was very, felt like this wasn't the right thing. Now, a lot of young people don't want to do what they declare a major in, but they don't fall apart. But I did. And I had what you guess you would call a breakthrough. And my dad came to this college to pick me up, and he said, in his professorial but very kind voice too, he said, "What seems to be the problem?" And I said, "I don't know who I am." And he said, "You're a child of God." And I said, "I don't know what that means." And I didn't. I was in a very dark place. And it took me a long time. I got help. It was wonderful. This wonderful therapist looked at me and he said, "What's the matter? Are you a little confused?" And I felt like a house fell off my back. And he was fabulous and, you know, became very important in my life from about the ages of 18 to 20. And then I continued to see him when I needed to throughout those fragile years of young adulthood. So now fast forward to finishing at the university I really love, getting a career I'm happy about. That takes a little struggle, but I end up in human resources and corporate recruiting, find the love of my life, all these good things, have 4 children, and now my youngest is going to kindergarten. A lady at church says to me, "You know, you and your husband like to do these discovery weekends, right?" And I said, "Yeah," and that was patterned after Marriage Encounter. And I married a nice Jewish boy, and I was raised Catholic, so when we did this discovery weekend, and I said, "Would you like to be prayer couples or greeters or something?" He said, "I want to do it all." And I was like on cloud 9 because I knew that that would be our connection, you know? I didn't really need a partner in my life to have the identical faith that I had, but I did want, you know, you want some kind of glue knowing we agreed to raise our children in a Christian tradition. So this lady suggested I do this class. The bottom line to this little story is, after these 2 years of personal development, learning to lead small groups and run retreats, etc., professors from Loyola waltz in and they say, "Oh, you've developed X amount of credits towards a Master of Arts in Pastoral Studies." And I thought, well, that's really nice. I was about ready to have my 4th baby, and I thought, I'm never going to do that, but that's nice. So, you know, again, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. My mother passed when my 4th was born. My mother passed, and now they give us a 5-year window. So I get into this program, and this is the thing that has neon around it for me. I loved all of it. I loved the feminist theology, and I loved all the good stuff. But there was something about this, and it's ancient for those of you who don't know it. It's just, they don't know for sure how old it is, but they think possibly 4,000 years old. And I don't know much about this, so I'm going to say it very briefly, but originally, it was called the Enneagon. Ennea means 9, by the way, in Greek. And it was about 9 celestial bodies in the sky. And somehow it then took a human application over time, and it became the Enneagram. Now, what I would like to just see a show of hands of how many of you are familiar, are somewhat familiar with it. And so how many are newcomers to it, completely newcomers? About half and half. Okay, so what I want you to know is that from a standpoint of psychology, the Enneagram is 9 ways of being. From a standpoint of spirituality, the Enneagram is 9 manifestations of the divine. So somebody could use this. I've taught it for 17 years, and somebody could, in fact they have in workshops said, I'm not very spiritual at all, but this is just about a paradigm about learning to live a better life from within, knowing yourself well, knowing when you're balanced, what it looks like when you're disconnected, what it looks like when you're very connected, or centered is another way of saying it, we might, or secure. So it's a way of seeing yourself. The more study you do, and the profile I happen to give, I call it an emotional MRI, because it sort of shows you very specifically what you look like. You, not you, but you, what you look like. When you're centered and safe and secure, and when you're coming from those gifts, and it shows you what you look like when you're disconnected and insecure and dysfunctional, all these things that kind of would go along, the same line of that train of thought. So the Enneagram, all those arrows that you see up there, that is, and we'll get a little bit into that. My book is on the 7 Mainstays. I'll have the book over there later, but I am going to talk with you, since this is a book presentation, about this book, and it's called Who You Are Meant to Be, The Enneagram Effect. I got my title because a millennial who told me I was going to say the Enneagram Effect on Who You're Meant to Be, and I didn't like the on in there. And he said, why don't you call it Who You're Meant to Be? Why don't you give it to our generation who is seeking and searching? Call it Who You're Meant to Be, the Enneagram Effect. So that's how that came to be. But it's really, it's not an advanced book, but it is not a beginner book either. I mean, it's good for beginners or advanced. I'd like to say that it's somewhere in the middle, because I tell a short story about each type to get you familiar with what it, because you certainly know all of these types. You fall within one of them. I like to say we are all of these aspects, the good, the loving, the effective, the original, the wise, the loyal, the joyful, the powerful, and the peaceful, are all aspects within us. But we have our home in one of these types. And it's really great news when you find it out. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You have to find out your shadow side, which isn't always the most fun. But actually, it's really, if you're used to doing inner work and you're about the truth setting you free, then it's not so bad. Finding out what your shadow pieces look like. And so I want to start with, I'm going to cover the 7 mainstays that I write about in this book. I won't be able to share the short story of each type, but what I want you to do is look at your paper that you got. And if you have a pen, it kind of, for the beginners in the room, it helps to flesh out the types. If you take your paper on the diagram side, and I'm going to give you, one time I said to one of my friends, Joanne, you're the powerful type on the Enneagram. And she said, tell me more. And I said, you're the powerful protector. And she said, oh yeah, that would be me. So she got it in 2-word descriptor. She didn't, not everybody, these are beautiful, these are lovely words. These are Jerry Wagner's words, who taught it to me Dr. Jerome Wagner. And he wrote a book called The Enneagram Spectrum and a couple of other ones. But he uses these one-word descriptors. And I think it's a great start, but I like to have you flesh out the type. So I want you to write, if you would, or remember the word, go to the type 1 and write, instead of just the good, and again, I want to just mention that each author will, there will be synonyms out there. You'll see different synonyms for these types written around by different authors. For example, the good person will be called the perfectionist, or the effective person personality will be called the performer. So, but here's what I like to call them, and that's what is in my book. So if you'd write the word reformer next to the word good, the good reformer, I think that helps flesh out the type a little bit. This is a type that just sees a way how to make things better. It's just kind of their MO. They're wired, natured, nurtured for that. The loving giver. They are about the other. The effective, I like to call this type the effective achiever. The original, or you could call this type the individualist. The individualist, or people call it the romantic. So I say the original romantic, but I like individualist too. You could write that. The wise, 5, wise observer. And the 6, the loyal skeptic. 7, joyful adventurer. People call this type the epicure, variety of good tastes. The powerful protector, so you could add the word protector. And the peaceful mediator, you could add the word mediator to that. Now that gives you just a sense of what each of these types are at their essence. One of my friends is a loyal type, and she said, I don't like the word skeptic, though. I said, well, she said, everything else looks very positive, but skeptic. But it's, when I say skeptic in the sense of essence, it's meant at its best, Otherwise, you could use the word faithful, the loyal, faithful type, They're very vigilant, and they, at their highest and best and most distilled essence, know that the force is with us, not against us. Great faith. So you could call that type the loyal faithful. Now, each of these types has an emotional passion. And the emotional passion, just like our emotions, isn't right or wrong. It just is. It's what we do with it. That it's kind of what makes us tick, actually. And it's what you do with it and how you manage it that is important for your own self-mastery. So, the Enneagram teaches, the wisdom says that let's start with 9, the peaceful type. I remember looking at that, and my husband's the peaceful type, and going, oh, he's the farthest thing. Doesn't sloth mean laziness? And he's the farthest thing from lazy. He's very ambitious and yada yada. But it's not about this is all about the self. So it's slothfulness of self. So it's more about being lazy with your own self-expression. So self-forgetting is another way of saying slothful, right? Self-forgetting, slothful with my expression, my self-expression. That's what that emotional passion is about. Now, everyone has an area of avoidance or a blind spot. The area of avoidance for this type is conflict. So you work hard to get to be peaceful, whether it's, we don't know all the answers to these things. We don't know if we come from another lifetime and we're working something out. We don't know if it's just nature and nurture, if it's the temperament, which is what nature is, right? It's how we grow in the womb and before, if there is, and then you come and you have nurture, you have caregivers. So the peaceful type has this tendency to self-forget, to merge with others to keep the peace, and their blind spot or area of avoidance, which falls under the shadow. This is the shadow being the part of us that we don't really know about or we don't like, so we don't pay too much attention to it. And the area of avoidance for that type is conflict. So the reason that the conflict is important to remember with regard to this peaceful type, avoidance of conflict, is because when the peaceful type is centered, they say, oh, well, I don't want to discipline this 17-year-old. This isn't fun, but I got to get my feet into the game here. And I can't make my partner the bad cop. I got to get in here, even though I don't like it. And I'd rather run to the hills, but I'm going to get my feet in the game here, and I'm going to say what needs to be said to this 17-year-old. So when peaceful types take responsibility for their self-expression and being heard, because they might tell you, their persona will tell you, I don't really need to say anything. She'll take care of it, or I don't really want to say anything, or I don't care where we go to the restaurant, or I don't care, you pick the movie, or they can do that all day long. And they want to be heard. Everybody in this room wants to be heard. I want to be heard. I teach this so I can learn it more and more and more. You're sitting in these seats because you want to become, you're already resourceful, but you're sitting in these seats because you want to become more resourceful. And by that I mean reconnected to your source. Resourceful. So when a peaceful type says to you, I don't really care, whatever, it would be helpful for you as a person who loves that person or cares about that person to say, I really do I want you to tell me though what you really feel. I don't want to just lead the way. I don't want to bulldoze you, or, I think you have so many good ideas. Like, are you sure you don't care which restaurant we go to? That you get the message. And you're trying to get that person to not self-forget and not merge too much with you, because when they do that, they're going to do that. That is who they are at their essence. I mean at their tendency, not their essence. Their essence is the pure part, which is balanced, which is about merging and being heard. The right, nice balance that they feel between merging with you and being heard. So that's just a little nugget about 9, the peaceful mediator. I want to just add that each of these types, this is what the arrows are about, has a corresponding type. When you center, if you're a 9, this wisdom says a corresponding type on this spectrum is going to flood into your very being and grace you and gift you with balance, with what you need. And conversely, when you abandon yourself and when you get stressed and disconnect, and this isn't house on fire stress, because that can bring out the best in you. This is our day-to-day patterns. When you just disconnect, this wisdom says, conversely, you're going to go to the low side of a corresponding type when you're already disconnected. So what that looks like for the 9 is when the arrow, and I want you to sort of burn this in your brain, when the arrow comes toward the type, so don't look at any arrow except 3 to 9 right now. When the arrow comes toward the type, that type has already gotten a handle on the fact that they're disconnected, they're a little, stressed, they're in that kind of place. And they say, I'm not going there. I'm not going there. I'm going to handle this. I'm going to, be heard, not be overly passive, not be overly passive-aggressive, And so what they do is they become very effective. And they are already patient and mediating and receptive and paying attention to beautiful nuance the way 9s do, and they are they are merging, and they are all those lovely things, and they are now also goal-oriented. They're motivating, but they're motivators, because they're already motivated. They're motivated by their internal truth, which is, I get things done. And I get things done when I'm heard. And so the affective pours into the peaceful, and that I call a heaven on earth. That's sort of their heaven on earth. So conversely, the hell on earth looks like, oh, the husband comes home from work and he's tired and he's a peaceful type, and his wife says, you know, we're going out for dinner with the Smiths tomorrow. I hope that's okay. And we're going to have sushi. They picked the restaurant. And he says, okay, you know, it's fine. And then they come home. He picks a little fight. She said, what is going on with you? What's? And he said, well, she's okay. I don't mind her, but I don't like him, and I don't like sushi. And she's like, well, you couldn't have told me that? You know, you couldn't have shared with me that you didn't like sushi? So, or that you could have put your foot down, could have said, that's not for me. Well, he didn't want to do that because he was already tired, and fatigue can be a cousin of stress, you know, so he doesn't want to get ruffled feathers, and so he doesn't say anything. And that's the pattern, that's the loop. So the fear and doubt that is coming, that he's dominoing down to within the 6, the loyal skeptic, his dialing down that he does or she does gets contaminated by this fear and doubt, and says, I better not say that, I'll ruffle feathers. If I say that, this will happen, you know. And all these kinds of, you know, even catastrophic thinking, you know, can start happening for the 9 who is disconnected, the peaceful type who gets disconnected and dials down to a point where they aren't heard and they are stressed, and then now they are getting all this second guessing going. So that's the loop of disconnection and dysfunction. The second guess, self-forgetting and second guessing. Does that make sense? Self-forgetting and second guessing. So that when they are in that loop, they're not very happy. And we kind of go in and out of this stuff all day long. The healthier you are emotionally, the more you're going to stay in, you know, the effective to the peaceful. But we're human, and I will teach all of this tonight, and tomorrow I will, maybe even tonight, probably tomorrow though, because I'll be tired and probably hit the hay early. But tomorrow, no doubt, I will do something that will be human and will be disconnected and will come from the lower part of my own personality type. And that's okay. It's when you get into this practice and you know, knowing this is one thing, knowing these, I call this a wellness map, the arrows. So knowing your wellness map is really important, but practicing it is even more important. You know, saying to yourself, okay, so say you're a peaceful type. So what did I do? How did I get there today? How did I get so disconnected? You understand what you did in a deep way. And so let's look at one. Each of these types has this wellness map, and each of them has an emotional passion and a blind spot or area of avoidance. I like the term blind spot because it's just a little easier. The good reformer brings to the table all these beautiful things like, you know, integrity and ethical, responsible. And when they are disconnected, they get anger running, you know, kind of a correctional anger. So they might say, a sister might argue with her other sister, and then the good reformer, the other personality says to the good reformer sister, you're sort of cranky today. And she said, why are you so angry? And then the sister says, I'm not the one who's the good reformer, the type 1 says, I'm not angry, I'm just right. And, you know, we all know what that feels like, even if we're not good reformers. But what she needs to do is turn that around and get a handle on that correctional irritation that sort of just is her little MO, her little program that runs her. And she needs to say, you know what, it's no skin off my nose where we park. You're driving. I'm sorry. I'm not really, instead of saying, I'm not angry, I'm just right, she needs to turn that around and say, I'm not really right, I just get this anger running, this little correctional thing, And when she owns it, I have a saying, name it, claim it, to tame it. So when you own it and you know what's going on, what your issue might be, then you have a chance to navigate through it much more quickly, right, than when you don't know what's happening, where you're beside yourself, but you don't know why. So the good reformer, when they the area of avoidance or the blind spot is it's kind of funny because we say correctional anger, but think of the emotional passion as perfectionism. That will help you more. And then the blind spot is anger. I've asked many ones, how often do you get angry in my counseling practice? And they'll say, I don't get angry that often. And then I say, how often do you like to be right? And they say, all the time. All the time. So the righteousness is the smokescreen for the anger. Does that make sense? So if you can catch yourself in the righteousness stuff, then you've got that emotional passion sort of running you all over town with a ring in your nose, instead of you being clear about what you're doing and then turning it around. Because when you turn it around, when you say to your sister who's driving the car, it's really not my place to tell you where to drive, you're driving, then what you're doing is you're freeing up yourself, you're letting go. You're saying, it's not always my problem. And that's super healthy for a 1. It's not always my problem. And what happens then, the arrow, you see how the arrow from the 7, the joyful type, floods into the 1? That's what's happening. They're enlightening, they're unburdening, and then they get all this gift and grace from the high side of 7. Because this wisdom says like attracts like. And if you've already centered, you're going to get grace and gifts. And then that's predominantly, it's coming from your own personality and then this corresponding personality. And in stress, conversely, the 1 beats themselves up. They get overly conscientious. Why couldn't, now say those sisters in the car, she didn't have that healthy response, and she said, I'm not cranky, I'm just right. And she kept arguing and argued more, and you know what I mean? It could get ugly. Then she is trying real hard to stand out and be special. And that's what goes on with the 1 when they're disconnected. The good reformer goes to the low side of original and wants to be special and can't figure out how to be special. So each of these are called points of integration and disintegration with PhD psychologists, but I find it a little easier to use the term wellness map, because when the arrow is coming toward your type on this paradigm, you feel well. It's real simple. You feel well. And when the arrow goes, when you're disconnected, when you're discombobulated, when you're beside yourself, when you're stressed, when you're dysfunctional, all those things, the arrow is going, you're abandoning your true self, you're going away from the essence, those gifts that are in you, and you're going to the low side. You're already at the low side of your own type, now you're attracting the low side of the other type. So that happens for every single one of these personality types on the Enneagram. And the loving giver has, is about the other. If you only remember one thing about the loving giver tonight, it's that they are about the other. They are relationship oriented. And they are helpful, and they are good listeners and compassionate. And each one of these types brings abundance of gifts to the table when they're centered. And in my book, I have under the first, after the short story I told you about, that opens the chapter and the type, the next thing of the 7 mainstays is strengths and challenges. And I list about 10 for each type. So here on this little poster, you see about 5, but, or maybe 6 on some of them. But you can sort of really almost meditate on some of these beautiful attributes of each of these people. And most likely you'll have some of them in your family. And you'll say, oh, yes, she is my little daughter who is a 1, who's 9. Yes, she is dependable. Oh, I can see, you can see all these little things in the personalities, you know, already. So let's look at 2 in a nutshell. I won't be able to go through all of them, but I want to go through, at least give you a handle on, I gave you a little brief description also of types. And so you can look at that and, you know, decide if you have a sense of where you fit in, or you already know because you've done some work on this. You could study the other types a little bit. And, you know, because the principle is when the arrow comes toward the type, it's being gifted. And I like to say graced. And when the arrow is going away from the type, it's dominoing down into the gunk further. Okay? So that, if you can just remember that principle alone, you can self-study and learn a lot about what goes on for each of these personality types that are on the back of your paper, the brief description, just as a nice place to start. So the loving giver has pride as their emotional passion. These emotional passions used to be called the 7 deadly sins, by the way, which probably, you know, I don't love all that language anymore. The kind of, for me, they're a little bit button pushing. So I like to say, we don't really use that terminology. We say that emotional passions, or Dr. David Daniels, who, the late Dr. David Daniels, was a psychiatrist who used the term driving energy. So I like that term too, emotional passion or driving energy. So their driving energy, the loving giver, is pride. And they were told probably from the time they were little, we've all done that and meant well. Oh, you're such a sweetheart, you know, to somebody. Isn't she caring? Or you see a little 2-year-old in an environment and they give their toy to somebody else. Or I don't know, you know, it's just all these little things can happen to a little developing personality that make them know, that mirror back to them that they are a little giver, that they're a little helper, a little loving giver. And so that's wonderful. There are a million beautiful things about each one of these personality types. And we have to have a personality before we can transcend it, right? The Enneagram, somebody once said to me, and I mean only one person in 17 years, but she did, oh, I don't know if I like those personality systems, and they kind of put you in boxes. And I said, I just reminded her that the Enneagram is the antithesis of wanting to put you in a box. It is trying to show you the box that you're in so that you can peel the walls down occasionally, you know, and peek out of the box that we live within. It's trying to help us connect to our spirit, where we have so much more and so much more of realization of our gifts, right? And when we're in that place, how many wonderful things happen. How many amazing things happen for us and for others. When we're doing that kind of inner work, we raise the vibration for everyone around us. So when the giver gives to get, and has that old voice of, you know, gotta give, you know, giving is receiving, you know, they need the new mantra that yes, mother, or whoever taught me that, giving is receiving, and so is receiving giving. Because if I'm doing all the giving, that means I'm not letting somebody else do the giving. So it's all about balance. The Enneagram is about finding the balance within, because the balance is what creates wholeness. And from wholeness, again, amazing, beautiful things happen to you and to your others. So when the loving giver is in tune with that mantra, giving is receiving, and so is receiving giving. I need a balance. I can't burn out and get resentful. I need to have practice good self-care, and not just on the surface, but really knowing what I need, because their area of avoidance is their personal needs, their needs. They don't pay attention to their needs if they're not healthy. It's all about the other. And what happens when you're all about the other, who could just shout out what happens to you when you're all about the other constantly, forever and ever and a day? You lose yourself. But what emotion do you start to feel when you're resentment? You can't do that without getting angry if no one's giving back to you. It's the human condition. We like reciprocity. We need reciprocity. It's important in our lives. So yes, giving is receiving, and so is receiving giving. So when that person is there, they receive from the high side of 4, and they're creative, and they're artistic, and they're romantic, and their sensitivity is heightened, and they are very individualistic and unique, but they know you are too. They're not at the low side of 4 where they're trying too hard to be special. They're just, we're all special, and here's my creative no. I can't help you today because I'm going to be taking care of another priority. Or, you know, it's the classic healthy 2 can sit on her hands at a volunteer meeting when everybody's raising their hand and she wants to go, oh, I can always do more. I could help, I could do more. She needs to sit on her hands and say, let me think about that a little bit. Can I get back to you? That's a healthy response for a 2. Because her tendency is always going to be to want to help. So she's not going to err on the side of not helping enough. Are you with me? So each of these personalities, if they go into an extreme, they run into their opposite, is the point. So if you're good to a fault and perfectionistic, you become angry or righteous. If you're loving, giving to a fault, how is being resentful being loving? It's really not a very loving state to be in when you are resentful, right? And angry. And so this is how this wisdom is applying. It's giving us these nuggets of truths that resonate deeply. And I remember asking my professor in my curriculum, because, you know, this is bound to bring up a little bit of anxiety, because then you're like, oh, I've been kind of doing it maybe a little bit wrong sometimes, you know, like I want to be centered, I want to come from that more. But we're all in process. There's no race. It's all about process and just understanding what you want out of this and how you want to learn and how you want to grow. Anyway, I remember saying to Jerry Wagner, well, if our personalities are formed by the time we're 4, now they believe our personalities are formed by about the time we're 4 experts, how do we get to the higher side of who we're called to be or meant to be? And Jerry's a 5, and sensing the anxiety in the room, he made a little joke, a little funny, went to the low side of joyful there, and he said, oh, we do it about a minute a month. And something was born inside of me at that moment to say no. We have to do this more than a minute a month. We have to do this more than a minute a day. We have to do this more than a minute an hour. We can be conscious. See, this is a personality to higher consciousness model. But what happens when we are in higher consciousness is we make great relationships. Because if we're doing that kind of work within ourselves, generally we are attracting that to ourselves. And think about leaders of countries if they did this work. Instead of projecting their blame on everyone else or projecting their stuff, they would take responsibility and lead in such a better way. There would be there would be just for couples, for marriages, for parenting, and there are all sorts of books, the Enneagram of Parenting and Elizabeth Wagle, and I can give you a lot of resources, or you can find them on the internet. But the point that the reason this is so powerful for so many people across the world, and I've taught it in living rooms, corporations, and cruise ships, it's so universal. It's just everybody finds something in it that speaks to them, and they say, yeah, I want that wellness map. I want that. I want to go to the higher side of who I'm meant to be every day, because that's when things work easier. So let's look at 3. So the emotional passion for 3 is deceit. That doesn't mean 3s performing types, achieving types like to lie. That's not, the word is a little bit misleading there. It's that they reframe for success. So 3s, effective achievers, they first of all bring to the table, they get us to move and shake, and they're goal-oriented, and they're at the high end, they're going to be very successful, but it's going to be a success that's built on team and inner motivation and inner truth. When they're disconnected, the 3 lets image and role and being a chameleon to everybody else kind of trump their feelings. And so they need to turn that around and say, for example, I've been at this job 60 hours this week. Somebody might say to their boss, I'm very depleted. I am not going to be able to give you much quality work here. It's time for me to go. And that might be very difficult for a 3 because that looks like failure, and they avoid failure. Their area of avoidance or blind spot is failure. So the tendency is for the 3 to mask feelings, to wear a mask, to be what you want me to be, to, at the very worst image is to be a chipmunk on roller skates, I say, going, doing whatever anybody needs till they basically are able to almost do it no longer, and they go to the low side of 9, where they get very zoned out, and conversely, when they are paying attention to that and saying, my feelings count, and I am not letting my feelings, get buried under all what is supposed to be the image of me as this worker at this company, or father, or husband, or friend, whatever the role they're in. That can take on an overdrive. So when they note that, what is happening is they are paying attention to their inner truth. The inner truth, the 6 has a strong, strong inner knowing. I told you in the beginning that the force is with us, not against us. They pay attention to that. And that is what is when the 3 centers comes into them. So their area of avoidance, I said, was failure. So they need to name that failure bothers them and maybe work through the failure instead of push it down, work it through. So this is, again, a very simplistic, because each of these there's many nuances to each of these types, but to get you sort of familiar with it, and I have to go with the fact that some people don't know anything about it in the room. This emotional passion or driving energy, which is this big word here, and then the area of avoidance is the smaller one, or the blind spot. Those contribute to how you feel, So if you're paying attention to that and you're managing your emotional passion and you're working through the blind spot, so I like to say, circle those emotional passions in red sort of like a stop, drop, and roll. You know, I'm going to stop on this. I'm going to be aware of it, and I'm going to work it through. I'm going to manage it. And then the green, circle the areas of avoidance or the blind spots in green so that you learn to work through them. Pay attention to them by working through. Green, go through. Red, stop, pay attention. That's a real helpful way to, when you know your type, because again, I'm teaching you about all the types tonight. And the workshop will concentrate on who's ever there. If we have all 9 types, we will go through all 9 types very in depth. But if we have 6 of the 9 types, then I'll just focus on those. And it's really helpful to do your own work individually because this is a lot of information, right, to take in at 7, at night. But what I want you to remember is that each type has these emotional passions or driving energies. They each have the blind spot, and they each have corresponding types that, when they center, gift and grace them or take them down further. And if you remember that much about this paradigm, you will go home knowing that this has great gifts to offer you. So I think we could look at 4, and maybe I'll skip then, and we'll see how are we doing for time. Oh my goodness, we have only about 5 minutes left. So I did 1, 2, and 3. Let's go up to, I did 9 too, 9, 1, 2, and 3. So let's go to the wise observer. The wise observer brings, an ability to analyze, take things apart, synthesize, see the whole. They are brilliant. They bring all these wonderful things to the table: non-judgment, objectivity. Their emotional passion is a greed of self. They, when they're disconnected, would prefer to be in their cave, real or metaphorical. So they might be withholding when you're next to them, and they may not share very much or want to, sort of like this for the 5. You're sharing with them on a heart-to-heart basis, right? And they get a little prickly in their heart. Even if they're very emotionally well, they still will have a tendency to feel that. And so that feels a little strange. And then depending upon how emotionally centered and well they are in that moment too, if they stay with you in that, you know that they have that capacity. But if they don't, they will go up into their head and into their cave. So I gave you a sheet of paper that also said which types are. I divided these 9 types into a triad, 3 triads. 8 triads. Yes, 3 triads. Am I redundant? Is it a triad? 3 different triads. So 8, 9, and 1 are gut-oriented types. I'll close with this and then we can have a few questions after. But this is very wonderful shortcut to learning something good about the Enneagram. The 8, 9, and 1, the powerful protector, peaceful mediator, and good reformer, are gut-oriented types. This means these are called instinctual centers. This means their knowing comes to them that way in the gut. The 2, loving giver, 3, effective achiever, and 4, original or romantic types are heart types. This means their knowing comes that way. And it's just they're very well practiced in these areas, right? The gut or the heart. Now the 5, the wise observer, the 6, the loyal skeptic, and the 7, the joyful adventurer, are head types. So their knowing is strong this way. However, because this is all about paradox also, when you're on overdrive, what heart looks like is drama. And when you're making decisions that are, when you can't sleep at night because your mind keeps going and going and going and going, that's monkey. We use a term called monkey mind, right? Jumping from thing to thing to thing, but never solving the problem. Spinning our wheels. And when you are a gut-oriented person who's on overdrive, you might have a knee-jerk reaction, hence the word jerk. You feel like a jerk after you said something that you didn't really mean to say. So the best way to problem solve is to wait till all three centers are aligned. So don't solve problems out of an overly dramatic heart. You know, if you're a heart type, or you're feeling all of that emotion, then you want to balance that with what's going on in your head, but not just what's in your head, what's in your gut. So you might ask the question, did my neighbor who sprayed water at my dogs, is she really a bad person? Did we really move into the wrong neighborhood? Or is she just afraid? You activate your compassion, right, if you're a head type. Activate that compassion and calm down that worry. And then check that question out in your gut. And then pretty soon no, she told me, I know she's not a bad person. I know she's okay. She told me, I think once, that her son got bit by a dog. Yeah, that's right. Oh, and then you go over and say, well, would it be helpful if I kept the dogs, over here when we have a fence, but would it be helpful if I put them over here? Oh, yes. And then 6 months later, she's in your home having dinner, and you have the dogs in the garage. So, you solve problems because you align the head information with the heart, with the gut. You don't make decisions, or when we make these decisions, and we do, because we're human, we will, but it's a much better way of making decisions and solving problems. So I think on that note, I could open up for a question or two, if you'd have one, and then I'd like to invite all of you to. John's going to do that too, but we will get much deeper into it on Saturday when we have, and if for fun anyone would like to, I have a type discernment quiz, which is complimentary, and it's free. It's on my website. You could, in the morning or sometime tomorrow, it's 9 color-coded paragraphs, and you read and you sort of discern which is your personality type. But I have a very comprehensive profile that we'll be exploring on Saturday, and it's just multiple choice, but it shows you what your core personality type is, what your driving energy and emotional passion is, what your area of avoidance or blind spot is, what this wellness map looks like for you, what your instinctual center is, what your preferred instinctual center is, head, heart, or gut. And then also a last point, do you see how this is, it's sort of like a little caricature, think of it as an angel body, and these are wings. So the wings in the Enneagram are just the next door neighbors of the type. So the points at which you see the letters, or the numbers, are the core type, the core personality type. And the wing styles are the next door neighbors of the type. And you have 2 wings to fly, but one is dominant. And that also informs you about your gifts. And your, on the Enneagram that I would give, you would see if you're coming from the resourceful aspect, the high side of each of these types, particularly your type, and you'd see if you were coming from the less resourceful, in which you need some work, and we all do, because we're all in process. So thank you for your attention and time. And does anybody have a question?
Please just raise your hand if you do have a question, and I'll bring the microphone so that we can record the question.
Thank you. Is that little tiny writing, are those the blind spots?
Yes.
I can't read that.
Well, you can take a picture. It's all right there. And it's green and red, which will help you remember. The green is to go through, and the red is...
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And you'd get all that on Saturday. You can only do so much in an hour. The blind spot. Did you have a question? Does anybody... Oh, go ahead. And if anybody has a sense of what their type is and they know it already, or they know it already and they want a question, feel free.
Do you see a correspondence between Jung's archetypes and the collective unconscious and this theory?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question, and I love it because I studied Carl Jung, and I don't know enough about it. I have to be really honest. I want to say that would lend itself, but you really have to do careful studies. I know we did do a very careful study down at Loyola with the Myers-Briggs with this, and there were not enough correlations to say that introverted, INFJs, introverted, intuitive, feeling, judgment people were this particular, often, or the majority of the time, fell within this type. They couldn't prove that. There weren't enough. So I don't know. But does anybody here know their personality type? Yeah. Do you want to share a little bit?
I think I'm a 5. I've done some little quizzes already. So I guess the one question I would ask, I'm interested in knowing, so 8 would
Yes.
be...
You're powerful when you're
yeah.
centered.
So is that saying that that's sort of giving me an arrow to where I need to move toward because maybe I can say that I don't tend to be the boss and I don't tend to want to be the leader, but I also am just as I'm getting older, I'm noticing that maybe some of those characteristics are latent in me.
Yes.
So is that a direction that I am supposed to be going
Yeah,
to,
like
outside of my comfort
hour,
zone,
every
so to
hour,
speak?
not like just in your life, but every hour. In other words, a consult or a private session or your own study would show you how to access that as much as possible, because there's nothing wrong. You can go to the high side of 8 as a 5, and you know how to be really joyful and have this enlightened, unburdened approach to life. But this wisdom says generally when you're at the low side of your own type, you're going to receive from the high side of powerful, and now you're not only bright and brilliant, but you're empowering others with that. And you are empowering yourself and others, because for the 5, it's about the heart connection. Because they like to stay in their cave generally, or with the tendency is the cave and collecting information, right? So, right, and I'm a joyful type, and I receive from the high side of 5 when I'm centered. So I get all the healthy stuff, the non-detachment, healthful non-detachment, non-judgment. It contributes to my being enlightened and unburdened. But when I'm stressed, I go to the low side of 1 and I can scatter and then get perfectionistic. So it's really helpful. It's like, why do you want to know all that dark stuff about you? So that you can better navigate through it when it hits you the next day. And it's for people who say things like, well, this is just the way I am, I'm never going to really change, that's really very fatalistic. We can change until the day we die. My dad was 87, and he said, can you bring up that psychological test for me that you learned at Loyola? And he took it, and he said, oh, I got so much out of that. If I would have done that when I was a little younger, maybe I would have changed this or that for him. And he was very strict, and he was very German, and he was very rigid, and he needed to let go of some of that. And he could have, and we do. He said something very interesting to me once. He said, not with regard to this, but I had a good amount of therapy, right? I told you from, in early adulthood, and he said, we grow in spite of ourselves. And I said, yeah, Dad, but can you imagine what it looks like when you do the work? Like when you do the inner work, when you take the time. And I mean, our whole society and the culture today is so called to so many things because of possibly being, disheartened with other things that used to satisfy them or give them, don't want to blame anybody in particular because it's all different for everybody. I mean, some people get a whole lot out of church and other people just aren't anymore. And so we're seeking again. Everybody's seeking. So many people are they want the truth. And here's what also happens. When you are under the age of 40, let's just be arbitrary for a second, because make it easy to understand the analogy. They say, you're putting things in your backpack, right? You're putting them in, you're taking things at face value, you're thanking people, okay, professors in college. And then all of a sudden you're at a certain point in your life, whether it's midlife or wherever, you start to say, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. And you start taking that stuff out. And you have to do that. Because that's what having a conscience is about. That's what loving the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, and your whole mind is. And if you don't do that, then you're in a myth. You're living your life as a myth. And that's why people want to find more truth for themselves. It's very healthy to do it, whichever way you do it. And I would be honored to assist you in that process, should you ever want to come to different workshops or private. You had one back there? No? Go ahead.
So I see 4 in me, and I get the connection to 2, but I also see 8, which has no connection on
Yeah.
the chart.
Yeah, well,
What does that mean? I'm in self-denial?
No, it doesn't mean that. It means that you're very intuitive and sensitive, and you probably, I didn't finish that, by the way. 1 is who comes into 4. So all that oneness, that sense of integrity, that sense of being connected, and I have everything I need in this moment to grow, instead of all the, oh, sorry, I have a mic on. Beating the breast and, mourning and, longing and envy, that can captivate a 4. So the 2, the reason that your question is good is because you can't always find this out doing a little online thing either. That's why whether you choose to work with me or anyone else, it doesn't matter, or self-study. But you have these 9 types fit within the unique snowflake that you are. So it's very likely that your core type is 4, the first one, and then your secondary type is 2. In other words, and then maybe, however it goes. On the profile that I give and that we hopefully will be giving at the Theosophical Society, if we do a diving deeper one after Saturday, you would see all of that. You would see the chart of how the 9 universal aspects, these 9 types, fit within the unique person you are. But most important is your core type, right? Good question. I have, John will probably mention this, but I have books, and the 7 mainstays that I covered were the strengths and challenges, the emotional, passion, or driving energy, the area of avoidance or blind spot, the wellness map, just for your type, So you say you don't want to read about all 9, but you're like, I think I'm a 4, I'm going to read that. And then it's all about that. And then the instinctual center, and the variations of which wing you might be. So if you said you're a 5, you think you're a 5, then your wings are 4 and 6, right? So one of those is dominant. Do you have a sense which one might be? 6. So vigilance and forces with us, not against us, strong faith, strong inner knowing, as opposed to a more creative, 4. So you can feel your type and your wing. And then I have a whole section, just 1 page for each, on ways to practice balance. So.
Well, thank you for your talk. I'm a 2, and I'm trying to understand, how does that relate? It has a little arrow pointing to 8.
Well, when 2s get disconnected, that piece that question that I asked earlier, when you give to a fault, and you're out of balance in your giving and receiving, you can get, low side of 8 would be resentful, angry, controlling. It's basically, nobody loves like I love, God damn it, and that's what it looks like. And you just get disappointed and angry and all those good things. And so it's okay, because everybody goes to the low place. And it's like, think of it as a piano, You can come back to, center anytime you want on that piano. You don't have to stay down in the doldrums in those dark notes, and you don't necessarily, it's probably not a good thing to do spiritual bypassing and go to the top of those notes and think it's all easy, because it isn't. But there's something about the center, right? So what you'd want to learn a lot about is a 2, is what does it look like for me when 4 floods into my personality? When I can say the creative no. When I can put my hands behind my back and say, I don't have to say, the proverbial, I can help, or whatever, And I know you get so much out of giving to someone else. But when it's out of balance, it's time for the loving giver to see what it feels like. And she only needs to, I had this one lady in a workshop once say to me, I know I go to the low side of 8 and get resentful but I don't even know and I avoid my own needs, she said, but I don't even know what my needs are. And I helped her with the fast pen method of sitting down. When you think somebody else can make it all better for you, because that's just more codependence, it's really important to sit down by yourself and ask yourself what you need. And write, and just, I promise you, if you give yourself some time to do that, you will get answers. You will get some clues. And sometimes it is about, it might say, go ask my husband to, I don't know, whatever it would be. Take me to my favorite restaurant for a change, or whatever it is. Whatever the truth is that comes out, it's important for you to own that for your own balance. Just like it is for every one of these types to find that, it's so much more fun for me to be here, to be enlightened, unburdened, in a place of big picture. And that is to say, nobody has the big picture. We just get glimpses of the big picture. It's very freeing to be there, instead of to be in this place of scatter and, better get it right, better get it righter than right, better get it, It's just, so it's really important to know what you look like and feel like when you're centered, so you can nurture that and cultivate that and raise that vibration for your own self and your own life, and then those all around you. I'm with you right every single day, right alongside of you.
No other question? Maybe, Rosemary, can you say a little of how the Saturday workshop will be structured?
On Saturday, we're going to do the discernment quiz right away. It's kind of, you could pass one around if you'd like. It's just, it looks like this. I can pass one here, and maybe you one at the back, John. It's like, on my website, it looks like this. So we'll do that and try to get everybody who doesn't know their type to get a handle on what their type is. And I have a way to help you discern what your type is. Again, it will be general. It won't be so general if you read the chapter that is your type, that you believe, that say, does anybody have a sense for, let's just go like this. Does anybody have a sense tonight from the information that you gathered, and you didn't gather all of it, but you got a little basic introduction. Do you and you've looked at it. Do you have a sense of what your type is and you didn't know much about it before? Good. What is it? So you believe you're the loyal skeptic who receives from the high side of 9 when they're safe. So you have not only clarity, but calm. I always say, who doesn't want that? I want that. Clarity and calm. And then when you're disconnected, 6 get hypervigilant, right? And go on overdrive, the chipmunk on roller skates, scanning the environment for everything that can go wrong, and then more of that, and more of that, and more of that. Okay, great. Well, so that's wonderful. So then the people who know what their type is on Saturday, we'll start there. We'll try to get you familiar. And I think people who come, we're all very resourceful, but I want to say this. There's an arc of emotional wellness, Charles Manson down here, probably Mother Teresa here. Most of us fall somewhere in the middle. So if you have a very strong sense of, I like to believe that people who come to these things are already a little tuned in. So I'm thinking you can, with my help, discern your type. Might be that it doesn't go that way, but I'm pretty sure it will be. And so then you'll go a little further. We'll look at the wing style, and what that's trying to inform you about, And the wellness map is, for me, the bulk of it. It's I don't want to offend vegetarians, but it's the meat and potatoes of this. It's the big meal, the wellness map, because you learn what it looks like for you when you're states of ease and center, and when you're in states of stress, disconnection, and unease. So I like to call it a wellness map because it really helps us feel well and stay well. You know, my dad said to me when I was in my early 30s as a young mom, you should write a book, How I Got Well and Stayed That Way. And I said, I don't think so, but thanks, I'm a busy mom. But then your parents die and they become really smart. And, you know, so I hope he's proud of my book. I think he is. But I hope that you guys, you know, you have or I'll give it to you before, if you have a question, you're free to email me if something would come up. Like you just have a question, a burning question, and I'm happy to go through an email too. Go ahead, you have one though now. I have one question. Good. This half hour was devoted to that.
Thank you. Is it possible for a person to change their type over the course of their lifetime?
It's very, I mean, I would be the kind of person that would say never, but the expert opinion answer to that is we absolutely change, but we do not change personality types. We become more resourceful in the personality that we are. But you don't go like, well, 2 years ago I feel like I was more of a 6 and now I'm, unless you took one of these profiles and you had equal parts both, which I like to call a hybrid flower. You know, it's like you might, there's not too many, but in 17 years and giving in the thousands of this profile, I've had a few people who are equal parts both, you know, 2s and 6s, or, you know, so then they look at all the information in those two personality types that inform and help them, you know. So I'm going to just show you this because I think it's helpful to see. You see this symbol and you would get your core type, and then you would see the arrows where you go in stress and where you go in safety, or when you center. You would see your wing style. I write stuff on here for people, but there are all these types, right? And the way that this is just a multiple choice, a simple thing that you answer quickly. And then I show you if you are resourceful. You show me. I'm your instrument recording your, you know, I've learned how to do the percentile scores and such, and I fill all that in for you, and then you can see, oh yeah, my resourceful characteristic scores in the loving giver, even though, say that's not your personality type, but you come from the lower end of that. So then what does that say? I need to give myself more permission to tend to my own needs. It's really a very freeing and wonderful experience, you know, to learn more about this, whether with a guide or on your own. I highly encourage it.
Well, thank you very much, Rosemary.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
And as we've already indicated, Rosemary will be leading an afternoon workshop on Saturday from 1 to 4 p.m. The Enneagram Effect, Discover Who You Are Meant to Be. Because we really would like to know how many people are attending, because she brings the quiz that is part of the workshop. If you are not already registered for it, but are wanting to attend on Saturday, please go to our website and register there. Preferably register tomorrow, not Saturday at 12 p.m. As often happens here sometimes, just 5 minutes before they walk in. Now, register tomorrow so that we can have the material sufficient for everyone who will be participating on Saturday. And as Rosemary has also indicated, if during that workshop there is a sufficient number of people who would like to then do a follow-up workshop, we'll be also working on that.
Do the profile for each of you. You know, you take it that day and I take it home. We'd set figure out a Sunday or a date that's convenient for all, and then you'd come back and you have that. You start the workshop with that. But for anyone who it can't come, there's a lot of the information in the book, and I'll be signing them over there, so if you'd like to come.
Yes, I was also going to mention that we have quite a number of books, and please do purchase one and get it signed, because that will make it special, more than just the book itself. And a couple of other